So, if you live in Lagos or Abuja or really Kano or any major city, you probably feel this constant anxiety when you go grocery shopping.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone feels it right now.
Right. But your grocery bill isn't actually being decided in your local market. It's being decided right now on some like deeply rutted, unpaved road, maybe 300 miles away.
Yeah, that's exactly it. The real source of that anxiety is, well, it's operating in the shadows of the broader economy.
Exactly. So today we are doing a deep dive into a recent analytical report and a broadcast script breaking down Nigeria's April 2026 inflation data.
And there's a lot to unpack there.
There really is. Because our mission today is to decode this like massive shift hidden in those numbers. Basically, rural inflation is now rising significantly faster than urban inflation.
Which is huge. I mean, the divergence in that April data is probably the quietest alarm bell ringing in the economy right now.
Yeah, and we're going to explore how that rural pressure eventually just uh, crashes into city dwellers as a secondary price shock. It'll totally change how you look at news headlines.
It really is a structural shift. We are looking at something that fundamentally redefines, who bears the brunt of the cost of living crisis and when they actually feel it.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because the anxiety at the grocery store makes total sense, but where the pressure is coming from is what's genuinely strange.
Right. Let's look at the raw numbers.
So in April 2026, the data shows urban inflation rose by 1.9% month to month, but rural inflation rose by 2.8% over that same month.
Yeah.
And like a casual observer might look at a 0.9% gap and just shrug, right? Like it doesn't sound like a lot.
Well, that's the danger of just glancing at percentages. You have to understand the mechanics of compounding.
Right. It's like imagine two cars accelerating. A 0.9% gap looks tiny on paper, but economically, one of those cars is basically flooring the gas pedal.
That is a perfect way to put it. A 2.8% jump in just 30 days is a violent acceleration for a rural economy.
Wow.
Yeah, because we aren't talking about, discretionary spending inflating. We are talking about the foundational cost of producing the country's agricultural lifeblood.
The food we literally need to survive.
Exactly. When the cost of doing business and producing food in rural areas climbs at nearly 3% month over month, that pressure doesn't just vanish into thin air.
Right. It accumulates. So we need to track how that accumulation actually physically reaches you, the listener.
Because it always does.
Yeah. Because if you're listening to this in a major metropolitan area, surrounded by concrete and corporate offices, you often feel a bit insulated from the agricultural belts.
You feel disconnected.
Right. You see that 1.9% urban inflation figure and think, well, my environment is stabilizing, so my expenses will stabilize too.
Which is a totally logical assumption.
Yeah.
But it also happens to be entirely false.
Okay, so break that down for us. If I live in the middle of a massive city, far away from farms, why should I care about rural inflation?
What's fascinating here is this fundamental rule we're pulling from the source material. Basically, today's rural inflation becomes tomorrow's urban inflation.
Tomorrow's urban inflation.
Right. The city does not feed itself. It imports its survival daily from those sweeping agricultural belts.
So the tomatoes, the rice, the beans, the yam.
All of it. They originate in an environment where the fundamental costs of production just spiked 2.8% in a single month.
Man, let's give that a tangible timeline. Because if I am sitting in an apartment in Lagos, how long does it take for that 2.8% rural spike to actually hit my local vendor?
Well, are we talking about a massive delayed avalanche? Because an avalanche is the perfect way to conceptualize this supply chain.
Okay, I like that. So how fast is the avalanche?
The time frame can be a matter of weeks, really, depending on the perishability of the crop.
Let's trace a basket of tomatoes.
Good example. The initial snowball at the top of the mountain is the farmer's baseline cost. And the sources point to a severe combination of rural pressures right now.
Like what, specifically?
Well, you have insecurity heavily affecting farming communities. If it's dangerous to be in the fields at certain hours, your labor efficiency drops.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then you have to pay a premium for security just to harvest your crops. Plus, you factor in the skyrocketing cost of diesel needed to run tractors or, irrigation pumps.
Right. And the farmer can't just eat those costs. They have to price the initial tomato harvest higher, so the snowball gets bigger.
Exactly. Then the snowball starts rolling down the mountain, which in this case is the logistics network.
The trucks.
Yes. The rural trader buys that harvest at the new inflated price. They load it onto a truck. And now we introduce transport bottlenecks and bad roads.
Which we all know are a huge issue.
Right, so a journey that should take 1 day might take 3. The truck burns way more of that expensive diesel.
And the driver has to factor in the cost of vehicle wear and tear.
And potentially informal tolls or security risks along the highway, too.
So by the time that truck actually crosses the city limits, it is carrying the compounded weight of everything. The farmer security costs, the exorbitant diesel, the logistical delays, and the trader's markup.
It's carrying all of it.
And then the vendor at the local market in, say, Abuja or Port Harcourt buys that heavily inflated basket. They factor in their own urban rent and electricity costs and then hand that ultimate price tag to the consumer.
Exactly. The urban consumer acts as the ultimate shock absorber for the entire country's rural inefficiencies.
That is a wild way to think about it.
It's true, though. When we see a 2.8% rural monthly inflation spike, it's a leading indicator. It's a mathematical guarantee that a massive boulder of accumulated costs is rolling down the highway toward the city markets right now.
But wait, if this massive wave of cost is barreling toward the cities, it brings up this glaring contradiction in the news.
You mean those slowing inflation headlines?
Yes. If you turn on the television or check financial news, the dominant narrative is often that inflation is slowing. How do we reconcile a 2.8% monthly rural spike with headlines that sound, honestly, practically celebratory?
That contradiction comes down to how macroeconomic data is packaged and presented. Specifically, it's a practice called macroeconomic smoothing.
Macroeconomic smoothing.
Right. The headlines you see on the news almost always rely on year-over-year data. So they are comparing April 2026 to April 2025.
Wait, are you basically saying they use the annual average to deliberately bury the current month-over-month spikes? Because honestly, that feels like gaslighting the consumer.
Well, it serves a specific institutional purpose. Economists and policymakers prefer year-over-year data because it smooths out seasonal volatility.
Give me an example of that.
Say tomato prices spike every April due to planting cycles. The annual number filters that out to show a broader trend. Furthermore, there is the base effect.
The base effect.
Yeah. If April 2025 was a historically terrible month for inflation, comparing April 2026 to it makes the current situation look like an improvement by comparison.
Oh, I see.
The rate of annual growth might technically be smaller.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. It's like a car braking from 100 miles per hour down to 80 miles per hour.
Exactly.
You were moving slower, yes, but you were still speeding forward. If bread was expensive last month, slowing inflation just means it gets a little bit more expensive this month. It doesn't get cheaper.
That is spot on. And to ground this back in the April 2026 data, while annual inflation might look stable on paper, a rural monthly increase of almost 3% is still incredibly high.
So they claim slowing inflation based on a mathematical technicality while ignoring the immediate reality. That explains the disconnect perfectly.
Yeah, a year-over-year chart looking slightly less steep offers absolutely zero comfort when the month-over-month data shows a 3% acceleration at the farm gate.
Because the annual number is essentially a rear-view mirror looking back 12 months. But the monthly number is the real-time speedometer.
And right now, that monthly speedometer in the rural economy is indicating dangerous velocity.
Which people feel in their wallets.
Of course, institutional reporting often favors the smoothed annual data because it projects stability. It avoids causing market panic. But for a household trying to manage a grocery budget,
It's useless.
essentially, yes. The lived experience of the consumer is dictated by the immediate sequential pressure of the monthly numbers.
Which brings us to the really profound structural split detailed in the sources. Because of this massive disconnect, the whole country is about to split into two distinct economic realities.
Yes. If we connect this to the bigger picture, economists refer to this dynamic as a two-speed inflation economy.
A two-speed inflation economy.
Right. When you analyze the April data closely, you realize the urban centers and the rural belts are operating under entirely different mechanical forces.
Okay, let's break down speed one first, the urban economy. From the sources, it seems like the slight moderation in the urban 1.9% figure is actually a symptom of exhaustion, not economic health.
Exhaustion is the operative word there. Urban inflation is currently being dictated by demand destruction.
Demand destruction, meaning
Right.
people just can't buy things.
Exactly. Consumers in the cities have reached their absolute breaking point. They are aggressively cutting back on anything discretionary.
Like clothes and eating out.
Right. The purchase of new clothing, electronics, dining out, all of that is contracting. And because of that weakened consumer spending, urban businesses become highly cautious about raising prices.
Because they know if they push the price of a non-essential good any higher, the demand will just evaporate entirely.
Exactly. The demand just vanishes.
So the city experiences a temporary superficial cooling simply because the population is too broke to buy anything.
Yes, unfortunately.
But wait, I have to challenge that dynamic when it comes to the incoming rural inflation wave. If urban demand is completely tapped out, won't businesses and vendors just be forced to absorb those incoming rural price hikes?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah, I mean, they can't pass a massive price increase onto a consumer who literally cannot pay it.
Well, in a traditional retail sector, yes, margins would compress and businesses would eat the cost. But we are talking about agriculture here. We're talking about food.
Which brings us to speed two.
Right. Speed 2, the rural economy, is dictated by supply-side rigidity and biological necessity.
Biological necessity.
Yes. You can delay buying a new pair of shoes indefinitely, which forces the shoe vendor to hold their prices, but you cannot delay eating.
Right. The demand for basic staples is highly inelastic.
Yeah.
You might trade down from like a premium rice to cheaper grain, but you still have to buy the grain.
Exactly. You still have to eat. And furthermore, the supply side is equally inelastic.
How so?
Think about a factory in the city producing plastic chairs. They can idle a shift if demand drops. They can turn off the machines and save on electricity.
But a farmer can't just pause the season.
Right. A farmer cannot idle a harvest. Agricultural cycles are tied to seasons, weather, and biology.
They must buy the fertilizer when the soil needs it.
Yes. They must pay for the diesel to pump water when it is dry, and they must harvest when the crop is ripe, regardless of whether security costs are exorbitant that week.
Man. So the rural farmer is trapped by the physical requirements of production, and the urban consumer is trapped by the biological requirements of survival.
It's a perfect storm. The costs incurred in Speed 2 are absolute. They cannot be negotiated away by soft urban demand.
Wow.
So while the city might feel a false sense of relief as prices on discretionary items flatline, the foundational cost of keeping the population alive is rapidly overheating in the rural belts.
So what does this all mean? It means the calm in the city is just the eye of the storm.
Basically, the two-speed economy is essentially a collision course.
A collision course.
Yeah. The highly elevated, stubbornly fast rural inflation is driving straight into a weakened, exhausted urban consumer base.
That is terrifying. Knowing that this two-speed collision is coming, how can you, the listener, actively track this to protect your own household budget over the next 1 to 3 months?
Well, the source material actually provides a really clear analytical framework for navigating this specific window.
Okay, let's hear the takeaways.
First, you have to ignore the macroeconomic noise and focus entirely on the physical movement of goods. So, indicator number 1, watch food prices closely, especially staples.
Do not assume that a sluggish, broader economy means food will get cheaper.
Right. If the prices of rice, beans, yam, and tomatoes are picking up week by week, that is the rural data manifesting in real time.
So those staples are basically the canary in the coal mine. What is the second takeaway?
Second, ignore the annual headlines. Watch the monthly data.
Right, because monthly inflation reveals where the pressure is actively building, which is currently rural Nigeria.
Exactly. And the third takeaway, you need to monitor the logistics sector just as closely as you watch financial news.
Because the inflation we are discussing is deeply physical.
Deeply physical. Keep an eye out for news on transport and agricultural supply. Monitor diesel prices, which dictate the transport costs.
Watch for reports on major agricultural transport routes. Like, are there prolonged disruptions, road collapses, or spikes in highway insecurity?
Yes, because if a major artery connecting a farming belt to Lagos is compromised, the cost of that logistical nightmare will show up on your grocery receipt 2 weeks later.
So if disruptions continue, the price increases will persist. If they improve, the pressure could ease.
Absolutely. If transport and security conditions in the agricultural zones improve, you will see the rural inflation pressure begin to ease. But if those structural bottlenecks persist, the monthly price hikes are mathematically guaranteed to continue.
Which really places an immense glaring spotlight on government policy.
It certainly does. This raises an important question regarding policy.
Because everything you just described, fixing unpaved arterial roads, securing farming communities, stabilizing diesel costs for logistics networks, those are not things a household can budget their way out of.
No, they are massive structural interventions. The ultimate takeaway from the April 2026 data is that monetary policy alone cannot fix this.
You mean like adjusting interest rates in some air-conditioned bank headquarters?
Exactly. That cannot solve a supply-side agricultural crisis. If policymakers rely on the urban demand destruction to artificially drag down the annual inflation averages, they are ignoring the root cause.
Because a two-speed economy cannot sustain itself indefinitely.
Right. Eventually, the absolute floor of rural production costs will breach the absolute ceiling of what the urban consumer can physically afford to pay.
We have dismantled a lot of conventional wisdom today.
We really have.
We started with a seemingly innocuous 0.9% divergence in the April data and used it to map the physical avalanche of the agricultural supply chain.
Uncovering the illusion of slowing inflation along the way.
Right. We bypassed the institutional gaslighting of year-over-year headlines to reveal the real-time pressure of the monthly numbers. And we uncovered the mechanics of this two-speed economy.
Where rural supply rigidities are actively crashing into urban demand exhaustion, it really highlights the danger of treating a national economy as a monolith.
Definitely.
The data proves that geography, logistics, and the fundamental inelasticity of food completely alter how inflation is actually experienced.
Which leaves us with a really necessary, if somewhat unsettling, reframing of how we view the country itself.
How do you mean?
Well, we are conditioned to view major cities as the undisputed engines of the economy, right? They are the centers of wealth, the hubs of innovation, the places where economic power resides.
Yeah, it's the traditional view, yes.
But think about this. If the literal cost of surviving in a metropolis is entirely dictated by rural inflation, by the logistical hurdles of the agricultural belts, does traditional city wealth actually insulate anyone?
That is a fascinating point.
Right. If a towering skyscraper in Abuja or a massive corporate hub in Lagos can be brought to its knees by the cost of diesel on a rural dirt road, perhaps true economic leverage doesn't reside in the cities at all.
It resides at the source.
Exactly. Maybe the actual center of gravity in the economy has always been the vulnerable, unpaved roads leading to the farms. And if the cities want to save themselves to secure their own economic future, they might have to look far outside their own borders to do it.
That is a powerful way to look at it.
Something to mull over the next time you look at a grocery receipt. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive as we unpack the hidden mechanics of the April data. Keep a close eye on the monthly numbers, track the logistics, and remember that understanding the economy is really about understanding everyday life. We will catch you on the next deep dive.